Alrighty, welcome. This is going to be the walkthrough demonstration of how I'm going to be designing Stephanie's S13 cage. This is going to be following FD's guidelines so that it can meet all tech requirements. So let's go ahead and show you what we're starting with, and this is what we have so far. So this is going to be the 3D scan that I'm going to be using as reference to design all of the tubes and make sure that nothing's intersecting the chassis in any way, but also to be able to get the roll cage as close to the chassis as possible. And I also have a 3D scan of her sitting in her NRG seat that she's going to be using in this car. So I've already positioned her in the vehicle. She's centered to the steering column, and height and depth towards the pedals is roughly where I need her to be. So that being said, I'm going to be able to use that also for reference to make sure that there's no issues with clearance against the cage or anything like that. So let's go ahead and hide Stephanie and get started. So first part I'm going to start off with is going to be the main hoop. The main hoop is going to be my base point, and then everything from there is going to grow out of it. So the A-pillar bars, the down tubes down to the strut towers, things of that nature are going to be based off of the main hoop. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and slice the 3D scan using this plane so that I have a clear view of the area that I'm going to be designing in. So let's go ahead and view it from the front. I'm going to edit this part that's going to be containing all of the sketches that I'm going to use for creating the tubing structure. So let's go ahead and add a sketch on this plane. And I'm going to be drawing lines which are going to represent the center line of the roll cage, or the center line of the main hoop. And there we go. And while I'm here, I'm going to show one of my previous sketches, which is this one, so that I can convert this known existing center line that I've already created into a line that exists within this sketch that I'm working on. Now I'm going to try not to overcomplicate this. I have a tendency to overcomplicate things in explaining, so bear with me. This is my first time, I hope that you learn as much from it as I do. Okay, so this center line is going to represent the center line of the main hoop. So that means that I don't need to sketch on this side, I can just mirror it at the end. So let's go ahead and make these two coincident. Right there. And then please forgive my slow laptop. This laptop is not designed for what I'm doing, but I'm still going to make it work, because the battery life is amazing. It's very portable, it's small, and it has a dedicated graphics card, which means that it can actually render things pretty decently. Okay. So let's go ahead and roughly get the tubes where we want them, or the center line. So I'm going to bring this in, so I'm trying to get it within the body. And this thing is kind of slow right now. I blame it on the 3D scan. The 3D scan is probably pretty heavy. Okay, so now I'm gonna add radiuses on these bends. I already know what my center line radius is. You will too when you go to bend your tubes. When you buy the dies, they'll come in a specific center line radius, which means if you were to bend a tube 180 degrees to make a U, and you measure the distance between the center line of each one of those legs, the radius would be half of that. So for my particular bender, it's 5.2 inches. And there it is. So these represent the center line radius of my tube. Okay, so now what I can do is I'm gonna offset this line 3/4 of an inch, which is half of 1.5 inches, which is the diameter of the tube that I'm gonna be using to make this roll cage. So the only purpose of this dotted line is to represent the outermost points of that tube. So I can use that to essentially keep bumping it closer and closer to the chassis, just to the point where it's about to make contact, but isn't making contact. That way I can make the cage as tight as possible. And then, alright, let's go ahead and start adding some dimensions. So let's bring the height of this bend down. I want the height of this bend to be roughly where this is on the chassis. So I'm going to go ahead and grab it from the center point of the radius, and I'm going to create dimension this way. So it's at 31 inches right now. Let's bring it down to 30 and see how that looks. Okay, and then that looks a lot better. I like that. You can kind of see where this tube lies, and it's following this curvature pretty damn nicely. And next one we're going to add is the dimension width-wise. Come on. So we're going to grab the width here, and I'm going to set this one to 21.5. I'd rather it be a little loose right now. We can always get it a little tighter later. Next thing I'm going to do is determine the distance here, and this is going to be where it's landing on the base plate that's connected to the chassis. So right now 24.5 looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave that there, and let's see what else. So the next thing is I'm going to use this as an origin for the height reference. So I'll make that vertical there. And then, so now you see these lines turn black, which means they're becoming defined. I can't move these anymore. They're constrained by dimensions. And alright, so let's go ahead and start working on this one. So same concept. I'm going to use the center point of the radius to determine where that bend lies. So we're going to set this one to, let's try 16 inches. That looks pretty good. Now the next one we're going to do is the height. And then let's set this one to, let's just do 40. Okay, so that's what we've got there so far. So now at this point, everything is defined. So I'm going to go ahead and mirror this over. So I'm going to do mirror entities. I'm going to select just the center line. I don't necessarily need the dotted line. And then I'm going to mirror about this center line. And then it gives you a preview of what you're mirroring. So now there's a complete sketch for the main hoop. So I'm done here. I'm going to go ahead and exit this sketch. Now the next thing we need to do is create a plane that I can sketch the profile of the tube on. So I'm going to use this endpoint and this tube, the center line. It's going to create a plane there. I'm going to hide this plane since we don't need it anymore. And let's go ahead and sketch on this plane. I'm just going to draw a circle. And then I'm going to dimension this to 1.5 inches, which is the diameter of the tube we're going to be using. And next thing I'm going to do is offset the outer line by the wall thickness of the tube, which I know is 120 thousandths of an inch. So there we go. And this is our tube profile. So now I'm going to exit this sketch, and we're going to go to features, and this is going to be a sweep. I'm going to be sweeping this profile along this path. And there it is. So that's the main hoop. I'm going to go ahead and click yes, and that's the main hoop so far. And you can see that it's sliced because it's still a section view. So if I turn this off, you'll be able to see the main hoop in there. And then you notice nowhere in the scan is it protruding on the top or on the sides, meaning we still have clearance. And then if we zoom in here, you can see what that clearance looks like. So we can actually get this cage tighter. And again, this can all be fine-tuned later on. It's not super critical right now. I'm going to be designing this in a way where if I were to change dimensions in one instance, it will move the other ones accordingly. So it's not going to throw anything off. So I can always fine-tune the fitment later on. But for example, if you wanted to see it in live time, I'll show you right now what we can do. So we can see that there's a little bit of a gap here in this area. So let's go ahead and select our our sketch here, and if I click on it, the dimensions should show up. There they are. So I can grab, I believe it's this one, and I'll bump this one out just slightly. So instead of being 21.5, let's do 21.75. And then I'm going to click rebuild, and then you'll see this bump out, just like that. And then you can see how tight it sits along there now. And again, we'll go to the outside, and you notice that there's nothing protruding on the outer surface of the scan. So this is going to be an extremely tight fitting cage. Nothing protruding on this side, so we're good. Next thing we can do is take a look at the top sections here in the corners. Right in there. Okay, and I can't really tell how much of a gap I have there. So what we can do is again go back to the section view. Oh, I didn't save it. Hold on, give me a sec. So we'll go ahead and update this to 21.75. And then we're good there. Okay, so now I can do a section view again on the same plane. And then we can have a better representation of how much clearance we have in this area. So you can see there's a little bit of room here, so we can tighten that up just a little bit. So again, we're gonna go ahead and edit this sketch. And let's go ahead and raise this by, let's raise it by 1/4 inch, so I can add 0.25, enter, and then also add 0.25 on this one. And then let's go ahead and do rebuild on this, and we'll see it bump up, and there we go. And it looks like it's extremely close. It's actually making contact here. You can see it protruding into the scan. So I can't go that tight on the width, so we can narrow that up just a little bit. So let's do, we'll subtract 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125. And then we'll rebuild this again. And then that narrowed it up a little bit. And I don't know, that's extremely tight. So even then, I kind of want to leave a little bit of a tolerance. So let's just bring that back entirely to 16 inches. I think that'll give us a pretty safe tolerance. So 16 there. I'll exit the sketch and rebuild. Or it should rebuild on its own actually. Yeah, there we go. Alright, so this is our main hoop. Not a bad process so far. So let's go ahead and close that down. I don't need this sketch anymore. So I'll hide this. So there we go. And then I'm not too worried about these tubes sticking out the bottom. Those can get trimmed once I make the base plate assemblies that the cage is going to be welded on. So essentially the platforms. Okay. So main hoop's done. Alright, next thing that we can work on is let's do the rear down tubes. Those are pretty easy. Or you know what? Yeah, let's do the rear down tubes. That's a pretty straightforward one. So for that one, I'm going to do a section view on the side profile using essentially, I will use the chassis midplane. There we go. So this is looking at the chassis as if it was split and right down the center, right down the middle. So the next thing I'm going to do is a drop down tube from this bend, boom, down to the strut tower. And let's go ahead and do that. So I am going to go ahead and start a new sketch. This is going to be a 3D sketch. It's not going to be sketched exactly on a plane. Another thing that I do want to see is the center line. So I'm going to turn on our main hoop center line so that I can draw directly to that. So let's go ahead and draw a line. From here. Let's zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to drop it onto the strut tower. And then I'll dimension that in a little bit. So if you notice, it's nowhere near the strut tower. It's not a big deal. We'll get that where it needs to be. Let me think real quick. So what's the easiest way that I can do this? Let me see if I can get this back. Yeah, so I'm going to try and move this into position roughly where I want it to be. So let's go ahead and drag this onto the strut tower. Actually, not. Right there, and then I'll view it from the back. Drag this out. And then we're going to land roughly on the center line of the strut tower. And again, this can be adjusted later on, so it's not a huge deal. Let's go ahead and view it again from the side. And then I'm just going to extend this. And then I'll worry about trimming things down at the end. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and dimension this. Now I've always had issues with dimensioning on 3D sketches, so I'm sure somebody else knows how to do this a lot better than I do, but I'm gonna just make do with how I do it and just go from there. So I drew that line. I'm going to make that along Z there. I'm going to extend this out a little further. And then I'm going to draw another line. And this is going to be along X there. And then fix this so it doesn't move on me. And then I'm going to create a center line from here to here. I'm going to make this along Y. Oh, sorry. Along Y. And then I'm going to trim all the things I don't need. To remove the fix relation on this, and now I can start to add my dimensions. So dimensions here, I like to keep my numbers pretty even, so let's do 22 and 7/8, which is the nearest number to what was already there. And then for this one we'll do 6 and 5/8. This one we'll do 47 1/4. Okay, and that'll lock this point down. Now that point is entirely it's dimensioned. So if I ever do need to change the positioning of where the rear down tube lands on the strut tower, I can just adjust these dimensions to get it to where I want it to be. And then for this one here, let's go ahead and make this sit on the midpoint of this tube. See if I can add, let me add a point here. There. And then I'll fix that to the midpoint. Actually, no, I can't do that because if I adjust the main hoop, it's not going to adjust with it. So what can I do? What can I do here? Okay, I guess for the most part, I'll just add a dimension here. So let's do 2.5 there. So that'll be that for now. So let's go ahead and exit this sketch. We're done with the rear down tube. Next thing we're going to do is similar to the plane that we did for the main hoop. We're going to create a plane on the end here, a reference plane. So I'm going to grab the line and then the endpoint and click OK. And then now I can sketch on that plane and we're going to do the same process. It's going to be dimension this to 1.5 inches. And then offset the line by the wall thickness, like so. And then I'm going to exit the sketch, and now we can do a sweep using this. And there we go. And then let's go ahead and turn off all of our tools, and then that's what we have so far. Next thing we're gonna do and I want to show you the mirror function. So since I already have a chassis midplane, I'm gonna turn that one on. We're gonna do a mirror using the chassis midplane. Okay, no, I can't do that. So let's turn off chassis midplane. It has to be within the part I'm editing. So I'm gonna need to create a plane in here. So using the center line, you know what, I'm gonna make it coincident to the existing plane, the chassis midplane. Cool. And we'll do coincident. Done. And then we're going to mirror using plane 3, which is our midplane. And I'm going to mirror a body. And it's going to be... Actually, no, I'm going to mirror a feature. Just this one. So now we have 2 down tubes. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of a break, go for a walk, get something to drink, and then I'll be back in a bit. So, see you soon. So here it is. This is basically the complete cage. Steph's gonna be stopping by tomorrow so we can go over the cage design together and then figure out if there's anything that she wants to keep or remove. This looks pretty damn cool, but it is a ton of tubes, and each one of these tubes is gonna need to be welded, so that's a whole lot of welds. This is 33 solid bodies, so that means that there's 33 individual tubes on this bad boy. And each one of those tubes probably has, 2 ends, so 33 times 2, that's 66 weld joints. 66 joints that need to be welded. So I'll go over the design with her and then make sure that it's something that she's looking for, and we'll go from there. But I'm really happy with the way that it fits. I feel like everything's extremely tight. There are some areas that I need to look into the FD rule book and see if I can add another bend to this bar here. If I could, then I'd be able to push this and make it run more parallel with this part here. So if you notice there's a big gap in this area, I'd be able to squeeze that over, give a little bit more clearance for the seat in this area. But pretty happy with it. The only thing that I would need to do next is create the sheet metal structures that the tubes are going to be anchoring to onto the chassis. So it's going to be a structure that encapsulates this strut tower, and then I can use that structure to cut the tube ends down. Same thing goes for the main hoops. Create the structure, cut the tube end down. Also for the front A-pillar bar and the anti-intrusion bars right here. So I'll be able to wrap that all up tomorrow, and then after that it's just little miscellaneous things like creating the sheet metal structure to hold the steering column in place, and then I think that's pretty much it. Once the structure is added to the rear strut towers, I may add just a single straight tube across just to act like a strut tower brace. But I do know that Stephanie mentioned that she did want to be able to have this open. The firewall is gonna have a fold down function. But I don't know. We're gonna figure that out later. But for the most part, pretty happy with the cage. Let's go ahead and hide the 3D scan so you can get a better look at it. And this is what it looks like. Let's put the edges back on. And this is the cage. Once the cage design is approved, then I can go ahead and start to edit all of these tubes and create all of the cuts, all the contoured cuts that our laser cutter will be able to create, so that when we go to put it together, it's just basically a big ass big adult Lego set. So I'm pretty excited. This is pretty rad. This is my first ever cage design using SolidWorks. I haven't done this before, and I'm pretty damn happy with it. One thing that I did want to show you that I think is pretty damn cool, if I did want to ever make some tweaks to the design, all I gotta do is update a couple dimensions here and there and the whole thing updates. So let's say, for example, I wanted to make the main hoop taller. Let's just change it to 41 inches. We'll click rebuild and you can watch everything that changes. Here we go. And voila, everything updates together as one unit. I can adjust dimensions here and there. Everything's connected, everything will follow. And yeah, pretty cool. Pretty happy with that. So again, if you look closely, another view, I'm going to rebuild it and reset it back to its original dimensions, and you'll be able to see all of these tubes in these regions update accordingly. There you go. Easy peasy. Alright, so it's officially 1:16. I'm tired. I'm done. I'm going to save all this and I'm going to go home. So until next time, peace.